This is the final lecture for Chapter 28, and I'll be talking to you about sonata-rondo. So let's go to the end of the handout on rondo forms. If you look at example 28.7, which is from the bottom of page 663 of your textbook, this is a diagram that shows a typical 7-part rondo design. It shows the alternation between a refrain and episodes, A, B, A, C, A, B, or more likely B prime, and then A. And these A's could also be A primes or A double primes. They're not necessarily exact copies of the original refrain. If we start in a major key, the first B section is typically in the dominant key. And if we start in a minor key, the first B section is most often in the relative major key, although it could be in the minor dominant key. We return to tonic for the refrain. And then the C section is the most open. It really could be in any key or any keys. And in fact, it's most likely to include a number of keys, probably closely related keys. And if we started in a major key, it would be possible that its keys would include the minor tonic and vice versa. Interestingly, at the end, when we have the final A, B, A, the B music or B prime music now typically returns in the tonic, major tonic or minor tonic, rather than being in the key that it was originally. And this should remind you of something. It should remind you of sonata form, where the second group of themes returns in the recapitulation, but in the main key of the piece. In fact, a diagram just a little bit further on shows us the same 7-part rondo, but now overlaid on the top of it, we have some labels which show the similarity between the rondo form and sonata form. The initial ABA section corresponds to the exposition of a sonata form. The C section corresponds to the development section of a sonata form. The final ABA corresponds to the recapitulation of a sonata form. So when we listen to this, we hear some music that could be primary thematic material for a sonata form. And then we have a transition, and then we modulate to a new key, and we have a theme or group of themes that could be the second group of themes of a sonata form. And then instead of having closing material at the end of the B section, we transition back to the original key, and we hear the first group of themes in the first key. And you might be mistaken for thinking that you're actually listening to a sonata form, and what's happened is that the player has taken the repeat and has gone back and is now playing the exposition again, except that the second instance of the A material doesn't go again to B. Instead, the A material closes off, and then we have the C material. Now, the C material may have its own theme, as the C material of a rondo has its own theme, but the C material is also likely to have some developmental qualities. It's likely to take up at least some of the material that was introduced in A and or in B, and it's likely to have some of the qualities of a development section of sonata form. It might move very rapidly from one key to another key. It might have contrapuntal aspects to it. It might intensify the music by exhibiting extremes of dynamics or extremes of register. Often the C section is followed by a retransition, a noticeable section where we return to the dominant of the main key and we prolong that dominant in preparation for the return of the first A music. And then in this section that corresponds to the recapitulation, when we get to the B material or B prime material, it's no longer in a contrasting key. It's in the same key as the A material. Further down on my handout, I've given you a list of some ways that sonata-rondo form is like sonata form. So first of all, the first refrain, A, is like the primary theme group and transition of a sonata exposition. The first episode, the B music, is like the second theme group and the closing section of a sonata exposition, although the closing section is likely not to be so emphatic a close and will, in fact, mostly transition us back to the original key. When we hear the second refrain, the second A, it sounds like the performer has taken the repeat and gone back to the start of the exposition. Only this time the music won't lead again into the B or into the second theme group plus closing section of a sonata exposition. The second episode, C, is like the development section of a sonata. It is dramatic, it moves rapidly from key to key, it may develop ideas from A and or from B, and it may include a false return and or a retransition at its end. The final ABA or AB'A at the end of the movement are like the recapitulation section of a sonata. They bring back the A and the B themes, but now all in the principal key. How are some ways that sonata-rondo is not like sonata form? What are the differences between sonata-rondo and sonata form? Well, the exposition or the quasi-exposition and the quasi-recapitulation are in ABA form. This was not true of a sonata exposition or recapitulation. Those, we might say, were in ABAB form, or we thought of them as being in PTSC form, primary, transition, secondary, and then closing form. The end of the B section will typically not have material that sounds like a closing section in the secondary key, but instead will transition back to the primary key. And the C section may introduce a new idea, and for at least part of its length, it may sound more like a rondo episode than like a sonata development. We will be looking at some examples of sonata-rondo in class, and these are things that you should keep in mind. And that's all I have for you on Chapter 28. We will continue to look at some examples and make sure that you can recognize these forms when you run across them.